This is Ray Martinez, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today. You can always listen to me on any of your podcast sites, and it's called Conversations with Ray Martinez. Today's topic is going to be You Can and You Will. Now, some of us have heard this phrase before, and it was a junior high school coach named Hal Kennard, and there was a middle school named after him as well. But that was his motto that he would say. But I'm really taken off with this from the verse, Philippians 4, verse 13. It's one of the most quoted and often misquoted verses in the Bible. In the NIV, it reads, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Maybe we should say, I can do all things through his strength. The Apostle Paul wrote these words while in prison, while he was under house arrest in Rome. He was chained, uncertain about his future, and dependent on others for basic needs. Yet the letter to the Philippians is one of the most joyful books in the New Testament. Look at the immediate context, Philippians 4, 11 through 13. Paul says he was learned to be content in any situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. The all this, as he talks about, or all things in many translations, refers specifically to enduring every circumstance with contentment and faithfulness, not to achieve personal ambitions or doing whatever you want. But it doesn't always mean you're going to get the answer that you want when you pray either. You may have to go through this suffering, but he says, I'm going to endure, and we're going to do this together. The Greek behind I can do carries the idea of being strong or having power to prevail. Paul is not claiming superhuman ability. He is testifying that Christ himself supplies the strength needed to remain faithful, joyful, and content no matter what life brings. This verse is not a blank check for personal success, sports victories, wealth, or self-fulfillment. It is a promise of divine strength for God's will, especially in hardship, limitations, or sufferings or opposition. It really is a contentment and endurance verse, not a prosperity or self-empowerment verse. The strength is Christ's, not our own. We don't psych ourselves up. We rely on the one who strengthens us. Practical application for this would be when you face a specific trial, whether it's financial pressure, health issues, relational conflict, temptation, or persecution. Speak the truth over that exact situation. In this, I can do what God is calling me to do through Christ who gives me strength. In all the ways, acknowledge him. And the Hebrew definition comes from Proverbs 3, verse 5 through 6. Now, this is a related verse. I love this. This is the beautiful Old Testament companion truth that shows how we access and walk in the strength. And here's what it says. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Now that's the King James way of talking. The Hebrew insight on this acknowledge him, the key word comes from the root yada. Yada does not mean a casual mental nod or a polite recognition. It means to know by experience, to perceive, to discern, to be intimately acquainted with, to recognize and respond to someone personally. It carries the sense of relational, conventional, experimental knowledge. The same word used for the intimate knowing between husband and wife in Genesis 4, verse 1. So acknowledging him is really encompassing. So in all your ways, acknowledge him is better understood as in all your paths, your conducts, your decisions. Know him intimately. Be aware of him. Consult him. Submit to him. And live consciously in relationship with him. It is an active, ongoing choice to invite God into every area of life rather than relying on our own wisdom, our own strength. This really is the contrast in verse 5. When we do this, he promises to make your paths straight, to level them, to make them right, and guide them successfully according to his purpose. The connection to Philippians 4:13 is that acknowledging or knowing God in all your ways is the daily posture that positions you to receive Christ's strength when trials come. You don't suddenly try harder in the storm. You've already been walking with him on the ordinary paths. So his strength is available when the hard paths appear. Here's a good Bible story about this. David and Goliath. We're all familiar with that story. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, here he is, young David, a shepherd, faces a 9-foot giant while the entire Israelite army cowers. David does not rely on Saul's armor or his own sling skills. He declares what he knows about God from past experiences. Isn't that great? Because as a shepherd, God had delivered him from a lion and a bear that he fought off. And he steps out in faith when this happens with this giant. And he says, the Lord who rescued me will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. He's talking about the same God that rescued him from the bear and from the lion. You'll see that in verse 37 of 1 Samuel 17. David acknowledged God in his way. That is, the battlefield path that God had placed before him. God gave him supernatural courage and accuracy. This is a perfect picture of doing the impossible through the strength God supplies when we know and trust him rather than our own understanding and resources. How about Joseph? Read the story about Joseph in chapter 37 through chapter 50 in Genesis. Joseph's life is a masterclass in perseverance through hardship while acknowledging God in every situation. Betrayed and sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison, and forgotten by people he helped. They forgot about him. He asked them, when you get out, please notify him. Notify the boss that I need help and I can answer his dreams. Yet in every circumstance, as a slave, as a prisoner, and later as ruler of Egypt, Joseph consciously acknowledged God. He refused to sin against God. You'll see that in Genesis 39, verse 9. He interpreted dreams by God's wisdom and repeatedly gave God the credit. God was with him and gave him favor and strength to endure years of injustice. Eventually, God elevated him to save his family and the entire nation. That is so interesting. Did you notice throughout his story, if you read it, Joseph is never complaining. He does not offer a complaint whatsoever. He just moves forward. Joseph didn't have an easy life, but he lived out both Proverbs 3:6 and the spirit of Philippians 4, verse 13. In all his ways, he knew and honored God, and God directed his paths and supplied the strength to persevere until the promise was fulfilled. Isn't that interesting how those verses just cling to each other? These two passages in the stories that I shared with you give a powerful, balanced picture. We acknowledge, in other words, knowing intimately, God in the ordinary and difficult paths of life. He directs us and supplies Christ's strength. We can endure and be content in any circumstance of his glory. If you're walking through a specific trial right now, you can pray something like this. Lord, in this situation, I acknowledge you. I know you are with me and in control. I lean on your strength, not my own understanding. I can do what you've called me to do through Christ who strengthens me. That is the heart of both verses. You have a blessed day.